Okay, well, welcome everybody to the kickoff of Earth Week 2021. We are here today to talk about bugs with Sarah Koo. I'm pretty excited about it. We're going to have a good time. We're going to learn a lot. We're going to get grossed out, I assume, at least once. Sarah's good for that. But before we get into that, well, let's see. So the purpose of this event, obviously, we want to learn about bugs. A lot of people are grossed out by bugs, but they actually serve a lot of purposes, and Sarah is going to shine a light on all of those fun facts. But before that, I would like to talk about us, the people who have set up these Earth Week events for you. We are called the CARE Sustainability Council. We are a small group of passionate colleagues, just like you guys, consultants with CAP. But we decided to put together this community where we can offer, different events, networking opportunities, just ways that people who are equally passionate can learn and, make a difference. So some of the things that we do, we have a monthly theme. Every month we'll go over different parts of sustainability, one thing or another. A bunch of volunteering events, virtual volunteering events, soon to be in person. Obviously, webinars with experts like we're doing today. Games and challenges. You guys, it's a pretty fun, engaging group. If anybody does want to join, just go into MS Teams and search for the CARE Sustainability Community and join, and it's that easy. I would also recommend everybody to join CARES if you are in fact interested. CARES is more about corporate social responsibility, but we are their sustainability branch, so to speak. So I would highly recommend it. It's a really fun way to get involved and to learn a lot about, the Earth, sustainability. That being said, I wanted to take this forum. This is not quite about bugs, but this is another event we're doing for Earth Week. It's called the Carbon Credit Challenge. If you have not heard about it yet, I can go over it a little bit. It's really fun. It's basically anybody who would like to will compete with your peers as to who can do the most sustainable actions over a 2-week time. Each action is given a point value, and they collect throughout these 2 weeks. And at the end, winners get prizes, which is always fun. But it's really more to show people how little decisions in your life can actually add up, make a difference. It takes just a second to, compost, to throw something in a bin. But when you do that day after day after day, all of a sudden it makes a really big impact, and that's what we're really hoping for. And then this is just a fun way to do it. I'd like just to point it out too. There is a specifically designed scorecard. In fact, I can show everybody here. To join, just like before, MS Teams page, search for CARES Carbon Credit Challenge. That's where you'll find the scorecard. I'm about to bring it up so everyone can see it. Here it is. It's meant to be very simple. To register, you'll just put your name, email, HQ City, and hit register. That's it. You're done. The scorecard does everything for you. And then when time comes to start inputting actions, here it is. You put in 1, 2, 3, drink from a reusable container for a full day, you get 1 point. You donate unwanted goods, you do 1 trip, you get 1 point. But that's 10 points per trip. And then you push this button, goes to your scorecard. You push send to us, and that's it. That's all you have to do. So the idea was this, is that you can keep this thing up. It takes 30 seconds to register and 30 seconds to update. I don't want to take too much time out of everybody's busy schedules, but I do want you to be able to participate and maybe have some fun while you're doing it. So I would highly recommend everybody look into participating in the Carbon Credit Challenge. Like I say, just search in MS Teams for the CARES Carbon Credit Challenge. That is where you'll find that scorecard, and it's registered, and it's that simple. So let's move on. Today, our expert, Sarah Koo, you may remember her from our composting webinar, August of last year, something like that. She is a PhD candidate at Georgia State University. Her focus is on sustainability through circular waste management. Is that right, Sarah? Yeah. Yes. And I think a lot of that, that means composting, but that means bugs in all sorts of different ways. She can explain a little bit better, obviously. As far as her background, she started to manage a medical device company for 10 years, I think I saw?
Just about, yep.
Nice. So she is very knowledgeable. She is very open to talking. I'm really excited because her and I can always just bounce back and forth with all sorts of fun questions and answers, and she's got all sorts of fun trivia. So this is going to be really interesting, and I'm excited for everybody to learn it. And with that, I think I'm going to move on. Let Sarah go. Thanks,
Great.
everybody.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you for the opportunity to talk again to Capgemini. Thank you all for having me. I wanted to talk today about bugs and sort of hopefully by the end of this webinar, your perceptions of bugs will shift a little bit. Now, as Kevin said, I know a lot of us have some aversions to bugs and some knee-jerk reactions that, oh, they're gross, they're disgusting. Kevin, you can move to the next slide if you want. You know, we have this sort of idea that we should exterminate them as soon as we see them in our house. We need to remove them from wherever we see them. They're gross, they're disgusting, they need to be gone. And the thing about this is that, yes, in certain situations, it's important to have clean spaces or to have bug-free zones, but they are very, very important to our ecology and our planet. And there's a lot of different relationships and interactions and networks that happen with insects where if you, you know, if you wipe them out or if you endanger certain species, then it actually has very detrimental effects to the entire ecological system. And so it's really a very important thing for us to consider every time we spray things, every time we kill them. You know, I grew up personally in a household where we did the whole catch and release. If we saw something in the house, our knee-jerk reaction wasn't to smash them, although sometimes we did. But you know, it's important to understand that we are in their space. These bugs have been on this planet far longer than humans have been, and so it's important for us to remember that and to, you know, respect the space, and we can all inhabit this planet together. And removing or killing and exterminating them is not always the best way, and actually more importantly, it's not. It can be very detrimental and actively harmful. So Kevin, if you want to move to the next slide.
Sure, but let me just add one thing. You know, Sarah and I talked about this. We'd like this to be a lot more engaging. If anybody has questions, please feel free to. I know it's a big ask. You're welcome to unmute and ask, or maybe raise your hand, or if you feel more comfortable, just type it in the chat, and we can kind of address it whenever there's a you know, pause in whatever Sarah's doing. So please feel free to ask questions. That's what Sarah's here for. And now I'll go ahead and change the slide.
Great, and thanks, Kevin. If you could, I'm less familiar with Teams, so if you can monitor the chat, if anything pops up, then that would be great. So locust swarms. I don't know if you guys remember these from last year. I know there was a lot going on last year with the fires and, of course, the pandemic and murder hornets and all of that. So there was a lot going on. So this might have been under the radar for some of you, but there were massive amounts of locust swarms that happened last year across North Africa as well as the Middle East. And this was not a one-off. This is this happens fairly cyclically and regularly, but it can be extremely detrimental to the regions that it occurs in, because what happens is these massive swarms of locusts, as you can see from this picture, come into these areas. They feed off of all of the crops and then leave and move on to the next area. And this, of course, is very devastating for communities because their entire food supplies get eliminated. And so it's very detrimental to the communities, and it's a big, big problem. Now, the UN last year, they were trying to basically get money and funds and logistics capabilities to be able to fly over these areas to drop large amounts of insecticide to essentially spray these big areas to be able to kill these insects. And so there's of course some pros and cons to that. There's also you know, there are so many of them that it's very difficult to capture them if we were to try to just sort of catch and kill these insects. And so Kevin, if you want to just hit next, I wanted to sort of ask you all, and if you could just put in the chat, what do you think the best way to handle these bugs are? Do you think that it's good to spray insecticide and to remove them that way? Do you think it's better to capture and kill them? And I'll just wait.
Option B.
Did somebody say something?
Option B.
Option B.
Capture and kill.
Capture and kill. Okay, yeah. So so
How do you capture and kill millions and billions of these?
It's hard, right? Like, how do you do that?
It's not like it's one or two in your house that you're stepping on, but
right. As you can see from this picture, I mean, it's just massive amounts of it. And like, how do you even do that? And so, of course,
the vacuum.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I would think along that same vein, though, if you were spraying insecticide over these huge portions of land, I mean, you were just as much damaging your crops and everything else.
Correct.
So, I mean,
Exactly.
Correct. That's why I went with option B, because if you're spraying insecticide, you have to spray your own crops, and that means passing the insecticide to the food chain, and that means human eating it, etc.
Exactly. It's getting into the soil, into the water supply. There's all sorts of other problems here. And so I was really upset to see that the UN's solution was to spray, because not only is that detrimental then to the environment in a long-term sense, but it's also logistically complicated to fly planes over these areas where oftentimes this is happening in a matter of 24 to 48 hours, where these are, completely destroying regions and then moving on to the next regions. It happens very quickly. And so to logistically, time that to where you're getting them, it's very hard as well. And like somebody else said, capturing and killing them, it's just not really a very feasible thing to have massive nets to do things. And so you'll click the next option.
Well, Gene is saying that they use vacuums to get them and try to get them before they hatch. Have you ever heard of something like that?
I have heard of that, and that that is something that could happen. Locating that the eggs and the source of that can be also tricky, and there's logistically problems with that in terms of infrastructure, equipment, funding for that as well. So the option that I wanted to talk about, if you'll do the next one, is to eat them, to capture and eat them. So again, it's a logistical problem in terms of having nets that are wide enough to be able to do that. But the thing is that locusts in particular are a very commonly eaten insect in many parts of the world. And so it was surprising to me that the default wasn't to capture and eat them, because you can fashion very rudimentary nets that don't have a super massive scale, but can catch them. That can catch them. And so, if you think about it, if these locusts are eating the food supply, that means they're gaining the calories and nutrients from that food. And so rather than killing and destroying them either through sprays or just by squashing them or whatever, if we eat them, then we can actually regain those nutrients in a very healthy and natural way. And so
I'll have to say to that then you're running with the risk of basically eating the chemical insecticides, or
if you were to do that, right? And so you don't. That to me, it's a double reason to not spray insecticide, because not only are you reducing the long-term effects of it hurting the environment and the water supply and all of that, but you're also able to then feed off of this source rather than having them come through, destroy, and then you're left with nothing. And so again, actually, what's interesting is that some countries did sort of catch on to this and realize that this was a good sort of solution to this inevitable problem, that it's very difficult to be proactive, and then being reactive is also very difficult in terms of logistics and feasibility. And a fun fact is that locusts are the only kosher insect, and Israel is a common place in which they will capture and eat these locusts and these insects, rather than just sort of letting them come through and destroy things and then that's it. And so they are kosher, and so they are a very viable thing to be able to eat. So Kevin, if you want to move on to the next.
Sure, but actually, Gene has a question in the chat. So
yeah.
if we weren't to eat them, could we compost them?
You can. Sure.
Well,
but again, the problem is that they unless you're able to sort of harness them, then they're just going to move on to the next place. And so it might be, either way, no matter what, you'd have to capture them, whether it's to eat them or whether it's to put them into composting.
So when you say eat them, though, I mean, a person can only eat so many locusts, and when you're talking about millions upon millions of locusts, how much of an effect does that really have?
Right, but it could be a commodity, something that these countries sell, and then, you know, I guess begin to make that into other products. You know, what you're saying, it could be food for animals and pets as well. I mean, they could have a market for this type of stuff, and why aren't they? I don't know. You know, yes.
Why aren't you?
Somebody's got to go fund it.
Well, and that's the thing is that, you know, there are insect rearing farms in different parts of the country or in different parts of the world, and it's sort of like, well, if these are happening naturally in this region, why not take advantage of it and you know have them as a commodity that you then export to other countries? And you know, because the thought was that, like, okay, if you're raising crops to either feed local communities or to export to other communities, you can do the same thing with these. It just takes a shift in perceptions and a shift in thinking about how to use them, and you know, that these are not necessarily pests. These could be a valuable resource.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at these pictures. Those things are huge.
Oh yeah, and they're not harmful. They don't bite or sting or anything like that. And same with Kevin. We were talking about the cicadas. We're going to be coming on a cicada brood this year in much of the United States, the eastern part of the United States, and they're not something to be scared of. They're not harmful to people. They're not harmful to animals. They come out every 17. This particular brood comes out every 17 years. And the reason why that happens is because if just a few cicadas come out at a time, then they're very susceptible to predators. And so when they come out in big swarms like this, it's the same problem that we as humans are having with these locusts, is that you can't kill them all at once. And so it's a safety in numbers situation, and they come out to be able to then mate and reproduce and continue living, which is sort of the purpose of every living thing on this planet, right? Is to continue on. And so you know, the cicadas, it's a similar thing. I've actually eaten cicadas myself. I had fried cicadas in Shanghai a couple of years ago, and they, you know, just like with anything that you fry and salt, it tastes like French fries. They're really very delicious, and so it's an option to be able to eat them. And so, Kevin, if you want to move to the next slide, or unless we have another question or comment.
I have so many questions about the cicadas. So first, how do they know when 17 years? You know, when is their time, right? I mean, they're not down there with a stopwatch or a sundial.
And that's where there's things that happen in nature and time that's beyond my scope of understanding. There are probably some scientists who could give you a little bit more of a reason for it, but I think it's sort of a bit of a mystery to them too, because it seems like such a random thing. There are other insects that also I think their time cycle is like every 13 years, and so there's been somebody who has been like, oh, these are like prime numbers. What does that have to do? You know, I don't know. There's all sorts of sort of strange things that happen in nature that are difficult to explain. But another thing that happens is that when these cicadas come up from the ground, they're burrowing through the soil, and actually it's aerating the soil. And so like there's other nice things that are happening when these broods come, and the shells that they leave. If you've seen, like they have like the exoskeletons that are stuck on trees and stuff like that from when they're shedding and molting. There's really nutrient-rich organic matter in those shells that are good for composting, and so that's something that you can do with them. You can either leave them for to help to fertilize the soil that are, you know, where those trees are, or you can take them and put them into your compost, and they'll break down and be nutrient-rich for that too. So there's lots of things that happen there.
All right, I'll let you move on.
Yep. So it's a good start to sort of think about different applications of bugs. So food is one thing, and we'll get into that in a little bit more detail. But I also want to talk about lots of other different applications in industries, including waste management, biofuel, packaging, medicine, preservation, technology, and permaculture. And I'll describe all of these in a little bit more detail. So if you want to move on to the next slide. So bugs as food. Now, some of these images might be a little jarring for some of you, and I part of my just a little bit, just to I feel like that's sort of a natural thing with these bugs. But I just wanted to share some of these images to show that there are multiple different insects. Over 2,000 insects species are edible, and there's a lot of different ways that you can consume them. Now, what you see in all of these images are whole insects, but they can also be ground into powders and used in different ways. And so the second picture here I wanted to just mention here, there's a product out there. I haven't seen it in the States, but in China there are cockroach farms that are now they use cockroaches for multiple things, but one industry is cockroach milk, and what it is actually considered like a whole food because they have the amount of macronutrients, all the macronutrients to be able to be considered a whole food for that milk source. Now, I haven't tasted it myself. I don't know what it tastes like. I imagine it's not super pleasant, but because cockroaches actually, as a defense mechanism, are meant to taste bad. So that's sort of their that's why they've been able to survive for as long as they have. One of the reasons. But really, I just want to talk about bugs also as a sustainable food source, because what we're seeing with traditional livestock agriculture, protein production, is that we don't have enough land, we don't have enough water, we don't have enough food supply to be able to sustain those industries in the trajectory of the rate of our population. And so having insects, or they're called mini livestock, as an agricultural production possibility is not only something that is interesting and just neat in my opinion. I'm biased, but it's also just necessary because we don't have the resources to be able to sustain traditional agriculture, particularly livestock production. We just can't do it. And insects take considerably less land, water, feed, and emit far less greenhouse gases than traditional livestock. And so actually I wanted to take the opportunity to show you guys, this is my mealworm production system. And
Thank you for calling Continental General. This is MJ. Can I please have the policy number you're calling?
Oh. Got some multitasking going on. So we've got just a 3-bin system here, and it's just drawers. And actually, I will take one drawer out to show you guys. So mealworms, the adults like to hide, so that's why I have these little toilet paper tubes here. And you can see their medium is just, these are oats, and that's what they eat. And so the mealworms themselves, I don't know if you can see this, but this is a mealworm larva, and this is what the UN actually last year, yeah, that's what Kevin's got in his background, and the UN last year actually just approved them as a food source for the planet and is encouraging everybody to eat these because they are nutrient rich, they're very cheap and easy to produce and to farm and to raise. And so this is essentially, mealworms go through 3 life cycles. The larva is sort of the baby stage. Think about it like a caterpillar. There's a pupa stage, which look like, you probably won't be able to see it. They're very light in color. They're white, and to me, they look like little aliens. And this is the cocoon stage. So this is when they're turning from babies into adults. And the adult beetle is right here, and it's on its back. But this is the adult. And so once they turn into adults, they just mate and reproduce, and it's all just a very sustainable cycle that happens here. And as you can see, there's a carrot in here. This is where they get their moisture. You can see they're on there. That's basically what they drink the moisture from, carrots, apples, any kind of other little food scraps and stuff. And so it's a very sustainable protein source. I actually started doing this right before the pandemic hit. And, you know, when meat was flying off the shelves during sort of the hectic time, meat and toilet paper were flying off the shelves, I was not nervous at all because I have my own protein source at home. So that was, you know, that was something that I felt good about, and everybody can raise these in their own homes for very little money, very little effort. I feed these guys once a week. They're very low maintenance, and they don't fly or jump. So they're a lot easier to raise than, say, crickets or some other types of insects. And they taste great. They can be ground up into a powder, or you can fry them with, again, oil, salt, garlic, chili pepper. It's you know, really good with a beer. Just a great snack, great crunchy snack. And yeah, so it's a nice option. And so yeah, and there's lots of different types of bugs. If you're located in the U.S., you're kind of limited in terms of local bug production. Most of the bugs that are produced here are either crickets, whole or powder, or mealworms, whole mealworms or powder mealworms. Now there are some other. I wanted to show you guys some other stuff that I've got. I'm not necessarily promoting any brands. I'm not sponsoring anything or anything like that. But these bugs are this is cricket powder that's from Oregon here in the US. This is a bag of mixed bugs. It's actually from New Jersey. I imagine they source them from elsewhere. And then I've got bamboo worms here, which is actually my favorite bug. They fried bamboo worms taste like fried butter, like crispy butter. They're amazing. They're very delicious. And these come from Thailand. So these are just some things. You can get lots of different types of bugs online from different sources. And just some sort of honorable mentions. Ants have an acid in them similar to citric acid in like lemons and limes, so they taste very sour. So oftentimes they can be paired with shrimp or some other kinds of as a garnish, as a nice sour garnish that you would use like with lime. There's lots of different types of insects with different flavor profiles, but there's always the balance of having them as a whole source, like what you see in these pictures, or grinding them into a powder for those who are a little more squeamish about eating something with legs. So there's different ways to do it, but there's sort of something for everybody. If you're not quite ready to have a whole insect, there's powders and things like that. So Kevin, I don't know, I think I just heard your foster dog bark. So, but if you could just advance it to the next one, that'd be great. So any questions or comments on that industry before we move on, Kevin?
Kevin has questions about everything. So I mentioned earlier that I had a turtle when I was a kid, and I used to feed him mealworms like this. Mm-hmm. And I remember that if I left them in the case too long, they would turn to beetles. So you mentioned that they don't fly or jump, but obviously they turn to beetles that then do fly or jump. I mean, do you have to go ahead?
So the mealworm beetles don't fly. It looks like they have segments for wings, and they're because I've seen some that actually the shells do sort of. I think they might split, but they don't fly. They don't fly or jump, and so that's why you can see these aren't very tall, but they can't climb out of this. I have actually. I'll segue that into the next. I also have mealworms. You can put them in any kind of container with as long as there's vertical sides, they can't crawl out of it. But mealworms can also break down styrofoam. So this is a cup, a styrofoam cup, and you can see it's pretty deteriorated here. And so this is another form. Now I keep these separate. I don't eat the mealworms that I have for waste management, for styrofoam degradation. I have separate systems because I don't want to eat the mealworms that have eaten styrofoam. I don't know the scientific. There's been some research on that. I'm not personally ready to to test that out on myself. But I do have a friend who has fed her frogs mealworms that have eaten styrofoam for some years now, and they haven't died. And so now I don't know if that's that still might not be the best thing, but At least anecdotally, it's not super toxic. So that's sort of something for later on. But insects can be used for waste management. So whether it's styrofoam, mealworms have an enzyme that can break down styrofoam. Waxworms have an enzyme that can break down plastic. That was an interesting sort of story where the discovery of that was from a beekeeper who put like honeycomb into a plastic bag, and where there's honey, there's wax. Where there's wax, there's waxworms. And so there happened to be some waxworms in that bag. He noticed that there were some holes in the bag and realized, oh, waxworms can eat through plastic. That's something we didn't know before. And so I'm not necessarily saying that we should put styrofoam into a vat of mealworms and have them go at it, and that's how we get rid of styrofoam on this planet. But if we can isolate and multiply the enzyme that they produce, that might be a way to be able to break these kinds of materials down in a way that sort of mimics nature through some biomimicry processes. And so actually, so we went bottom up here, but food waste is also another management industry for insects for waste management, is food waste. And black soldier fly larvae, we talked about those in the compost last year, the compost webinar. And black soldier fly larvae are insects that are native to North America as well as many other parts of the world. And they will show up in your compost system. If it's an outdoor system, they'll show up whether you want them to or not. They just are they will naturally just gravitate towards food waste. And they are voracious consumers of food waste and just break it down very rapidly. And so many people will have, or not many people, but hopefully it's increasing. But some people have built like hutches in their backyards that are basically conducive to having black soldier fly larvae as their food waste management sort of compost system. And the larvae themselves can be eaten by humans. They can be eaten. They're actually very popular as pet food. So for chickens, for fish, even for pigs and dogs and cats. Purina actually, I think last year, are now incorporating black soldier fly and other insects into some of their pet food as a natural protein source for pet foods. And so, there are markets for these industries, and, bugs are plentiful. They are very cheap. They're abundant, and they're just, we've spent so long here in the States thinking of them as something to kill and something to get rid of that we haven't really thought about the applications and the use that they can provide as a resource or as a process for a resource. And so there's lots of different applications. So with that, we can move on to the next. There's also bladder composting. That's a term for cockroaches for food waste as well. And so that's just another type of insect for food waste management. But biofuel is another pretty exciting opportunity for bugs. And so those black soldier fly larvae that we were talking about with food waste, there has been a good amount of research that has basically taken, you take food waste, you put them in a system with black soldier fly. Frass is the technical term for bug poop, and it's I have some here from my mealworms. It looks like a brown powder. And this, I sprinkle this on my plants. You can also put it in with some water to dilute it out and use it, water your plants with it as like a liquid fertilizer. It's again, very nutrient rich, just like other types of fertilizer and manure from other animals. It's a very nutrient rich fertilizer for compost.
Sarah, how do you collect it?
Oh, so I just have a sifter, and I take this out because, let's see, I don't know if you might not be able to see, but there is sort of brown powder here at the bottom. Mm-hmm. That's the grass. And so every once in a while, I will basically take this, have a bowl and sift out the frass from the oats and the mealworms. And so yeah, that's how I get it. And so for a biofuel process, what you can do is then take the pre-pupae. So what happens is when black soldier fly larvae are consuming food waste, they're basically what they're doing is they're eating as much as possible so that when they sort of go into their cocoon stage before they turn into an adult, they have the maximum amount of nutrients. It's like hibernation, right? They're getting as much, they're storing as much energy and nutrients as possible so that they can have enough energy to turn into an adult. And so what happens is that when they're in this prepupa stage, they've harnessed all of the nutrients that they can possibly get before turning into an adult. And so they're very nutrient rich, nutrient dense. And so what you can do is then put them through mechanical and chemical processes to extract out basically the protein and the fat. Black soldier fly larvae are basically just protein and fat, a little bit of carbohydrates, but that's essentially what they're made of. And so you can extract the protein and have that for animal feed, which is a common thing that can also be for human food, but requires different regulations. But then the fat from them can be used as fuel. Now, there are some concerns because, of course, there's concerns in terms of this process. Is this using more energy than it's worth? What kind of pollution is coming off of this? There's concerns that are, of course, need to be considered, but this is a way to be able to have a renewable energy source. And so, having resources and funds go into looking for more renewable resources, I personally think is a much better way to spend our time and energy and resources than continuing to use non-renewable resources in the form of petroleum or other things. So this is an example of something for renewable biofuels, because what's interesting is that a lot of the research that has been done here, if you were to take food waste and try to convert it to biofuel directly, it's a smaller yield than if you were to have it go through black soldier fly larvae as a process. You actually extract more biofuels at the end of that process, not to mention you have other very useful byproducts like compost or protein for animal feed. And so there's just a lot of, it's a very nice and circular way to be able to have renewable energy source here. So Kevin, if you want to move to the next slide. Do we have any questions on that or comments? I'll just pause briefly. Nope, all right. So packaging is another really exciting thing. Insects are in the same animal kingdom phylum as crabs, as shrimp, as other types of crustaceans. They're all arthropods. So they all produce, they have chitin, which is the material in their exoskeletons that make them hard. And so this material, it's great because it essentially mimics a hard plastic. And so rather than having, again, a petroleum-based material like plastic, we can use what happens and what occurs in nature, like chitin, and be able to turn that into a plastic film. This research, this image, and how I found out about this is that this research is being done at Georgia Tech, Georgia Institute of Technology, which is just down the street from my university here in Atlanta, Georgia, and they have created this plastic type film, but from chitin. From crustaceans and things. And so that's another application of insects, that's to be able to use the chitin from their exoskeletons, because actually, so what we eat from mealworms is the larvae, because the adults have chitin in them, which is very hard. And so it'd be it's not very pleasant to consume because it's very hard, but they can be used in other types of applications, such as packaging. So that's, to me, a really exciting new industry that I think has a lot of potential and a ton of different markets that can be used from that. So Kevin, if you want to move to the next.
Do you know more about how they actually, I guess what would the word be, separate the chitin from the rest of the, and
I've reached out to the professor there. I haven't heard back from him. I would love to visit their lab to see, but you can sort of see the different layers here of what's happening to make it a waterproof type of seal. They're basically mixing chitin with cellulose, which is that's a naturally occurring thing in plants. Plant matter has cellulose, and then there's a polymer in between. Now I'm skeptical of any type of polymer, because that may mean it's a type of plastics. It's not always, though, and so it's just a very broad term. And so, but that's presume that's what's making it helping to bind it together. A polymer is what binds it together. And so, but it's just to show, like, there are lots of applications to be able to be using this as packaging, but it's a very nascent industry that is not yet, there's a lot of research still yet to be done.
So for the moment, most of my plastic is not chitin plastic.
No, that's petroleum based. And the thing is it's similar to the concerns of compostable products. So a lot of times something is labeled as compostable, but there's an asterisk, and it means that it's only compostable in an industrial setting. That means that if you're taking it to your community garden or you're using it in a backyard compost system, it's not going to break down because there isn't it's not hot enough. It doesn't get hot enough. There's not a large enough mass of it to be able to have it break down into the industrial compost standard that is required. And so it's misleading when a lot of these products say compostable. Some of them are truly compostable in the sense of backyard composting. Some of them are compostable in the sense that 80% of it will biodegrade, but then 20% of it is still plastic. And so there's a lot of misleading terms with biodegradable, with compostable. It's very complicated because there's different standards and different rates at which they are biodegradable or compostable, and so it's challenging, and that's sort of another complication to these types of materials. But that's where I think chitin has a lot of really interesting components and properties that make it compostable, not just in industrial settings, but in backyard settings as well. But that really depends on how it's produced.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Cool.
So medicinal purposes, this is another thing, as I had talked about, in China, there are cockroach farms for cockroach milk, but actually the majority of those farms started out as for medicinal purposes. Cockroaches have some characteristics and properties in them that has been shown to help with certain illnesses. There's other types of bugs, different caterpillars and things that can help with gastric ulcers and weak lungs, shortness of breath, and stuff like that. And so again, insects have medicinal properties as well. And again, here in the West, in the US, we're really behind in the whole insect as a resource thinking. Insects have been used historically for centuries as food sources as well as medicinal purposes. And again, we're really behind on it. And so I'm hopeful that we can catch up and that we can not only because it's markets that are very that have a lot of potential, but also we don't have a lot of options. Our planet is deteriorating at a rate with climate change that we just can't. We have to get on the bandwagon of this, and so the more proactive we can be about it, I think the better off we're going to be. So if you want to go to the next. Preservation is another application for bugs. These, what you're seeing here, are dermestid beetles on a skeleton. So museums use them often because when museums have skeletons to preserve, some of them are so delicate that chemical processes can destroy them. And so they'll employ these dermestid beetles to be able to clean off skeletons that are very delicate in a way that really is not only very thorough, but it helps to maintain the integrity of those very delicate skeletons. And so dermestid beetles have a nickname of being museum beetles, and they can also be used in taxidermy. And so if you want to go to the next slide.
What do you mean? What are they used for in taxidermy?
In taxidermy, it's the same thing to just clean off skulls to be able to then, or to clean off carcasses and things to be able to then stuff, or to preserve to preserve them. But forensics is another type of technology that is really cool for insects because, as you guys, a lot of people watch forensic shows, and if you're looking at a body, whether it's a human or otherwise, there are different stages at which forensic scientists can be able to tell how long that that body has been there or has been dead, and that's based on the vertebrates that are present at the site. That's also based on the invertebrates or insects that are present at the site, because different stages of decomposition attracts different types of insects, and so they're able to tell at what point that at the time frame of the degradation of a carcass. And so that's a very cool sort of application of insects in terms of forensics. There's also cyborg insects that have been sort of a new thing, a relatively new thing, where these insects, whether it's cockroaches or locusts, other bugs, are sort of strapped with these little backpacks that have these like electrodes that can basically, it sort of shocks them on one side of their body or another. And what that does is that you're able to then steer them based on that. And so I don't, I'm not really sure why somebody was compelled to do this, but it's sort of a drone type of a thing. But one application is for like disaster relief purposes. So in the case of an earthquake or like a bomb situation where it would be very dangerous to send in a human or a dog, you can send in these insects that can either be equipped with tracking or with microphones, so that if you're trying to locate a survivor in the rubble of an earthquake, you can do that with these insects. There are also some research that is being done where somebody can basically wear a device that picks up on brainwave activities, and so you can basically mind control the direction of these insects. Again, I don't really understand necessarily the purpose of that or the application of it, but I would imagine in security purposes, if you're trying to do some kind of stealth sort of things, or that's spying or something, you could possibly use insects for that. Now, I'm not necessarily saying or promoting any of these kinds of applications or industries. I think there are some definite ethical concerns with a lot of these applications. There's certainly the concerns of insect welfare, as well as privacy, concerns if you're using these for security purposes and things. So that's a whole other type of conversation, the ethics behind all of these applications. But what always sort of surprises me is that we have no problem spraying insects for extermination, but all of a sudden people are getting concerned about the ethics of, having them for food consumption, but we do it for pigs and cows and things. Again, I'm not saying just because you do it in one setting makes it okay in another, but it is interesting the amount of picking and choosing that can happen when talking about ethics and insects. So, but I did just want to sort of mention that.
It reminds me of, if anyone's seen The Fifth Element, he uses a little bug with like a camera as a spy until he gets smashed with it.
That's what I was trying to remember. I'm like, I feel like I've seen this, but probably not in real life.
Yep.
Like, what movie? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, right.
There you go. So if you want to move to the next one. And permaculture, I just wanted to say this as sort of a segue from what we were talking about before. Permaculture is essentially just sort of the idea of like leaving things as they are and letting sort of natural things happen. So, in thinking about like bees, there's heavy concern about the bee populations becoming endangered. And their habitats being destroyed because they have massive impacts for pollination. And so if we're not careful, not only are we as humans very much destroying a lot of the habitats here, but also just, climate change in general. The heating of this planet is destroying a lot of habitats for a lot of insects, and it has a huge effect on the ecosystems of this planet. And so that's something that we need to be mindful of and aware of. And things like, I don't know if you guys know, but roly-polies on the left here, also called pill bugs. There's a lot of different sort of nicknames for them, but they have a pretty cool property where they actually extract heavy metals from the soil, like lead. And so that's a really, a natural occurring thing where like we need to support these insects and support the environments in which they're doing their good work in, and not just mass destroy these insects, because they have a lot of good purposes and good applications. And so just I know we have a tendency to destroy them, but they do serve a lot of purposes and a lot of benefits to our ecosystems. And so just keeping that in mind, if you want to move to the next slide. Hopefully, I know we're sort of close to time here. I hope that this session has sort of opened your mind in terms of the uses of bugs and how they are beneficial and useful to our world, and not just pests, as a lot of people think of them. And so I'm very excited and interested to hear any questions that you guys have or comments, and have a little bit of discussion before we close here.
Hey, I actually had a quick question. I know that you said that we're behind a lot of the world in terms of using insects for medicine and other resources.
Yes.
Do you think that'll, I know it's just kind of guessing, but do you think that'll change in the next couple of decades or next couple of years?
I'm really hopeful it will. So there's a conference that happens every couple of years. It's called Insects to Feed the World. And I attended this conference back in 2018 in Wuhan, China, which was where it was located. And what was interesting is that was actually the place where I found out about black soldier fly larvae for food waste management. I had thought that I was going to be doing my PhD research on insects as food for humans, but I learned about them for food waste, and I just really became fascinated with that because as somebody who lives in the US, getting people's mindset around eating bugs is very difficult. But it's not impossible. If we think about sushi, that was something that was very disgusting for Westerners for a while when it was first introduced. But now you can get sushi at gas stations. I mean, it is just ubiquitous now, and so it's not impossible to do. And especially depending on how we frame it, it's very possible to have these shifts in perceptions. And so I think we're at a time now where. Before, it might have been optional for us to consider insects as a food source or in other applications. At this point, I think we don't have the option anymore, and so it's sort of like either hop on the train or you're going to be behind, because we just we're at a point in time where it's not optional anymore in my
right. And when it does, it's definitely going to be a humongous industry.
Right. So I think that, it's like we have a really unique and interesting opportunity to lead in a lot of these industries. And it's whether we take that or not, whether we take advantage of that. Great question. Thanks.
Thanks.
We have a question from Solomon.
Hey, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
You talked about cicadas and how we're expecting a brood this year. And I'm surprised to hear 17 years, because I feel like cicadas is something that I've heard about and feared so many times. So I don't know if there are multiple broods that just pop up more often. Okay.
Yeah.
Which makes sense.
Yeah. Here in Atlanta, we get them every summer. In many parts of the world, you get them all the time, and so it's just there's particular broods and types. There's a lot of different types of cicadas, different species of cicadas, and so some of them are very regular, but then the one that we're getting this year, this brood X, that's in every 17 years. So there are multiple types.
So locusts have a very detrimental effect to the population because of the devastating effects of their food supply.
Mm-hmm.
What does cicadas do? And second question, is there any plan to capture them to maybe make food out of them, or at least compost, animal feed, whatever, but instead of the typical insecticide and run away?
Right. Now, cicadas are not harmful to humans or animals. I haven't heard of them decimating food supplies. That they might. I'm actually not sure of that. I think that mainly what is noticeable about them here in the States is that they're loud, and because what their purpose of coming up is to mate, and so I don't know if I'm unsure of whether they're harmful for food supplies, but I would imagine that actually they are helpful for as food sources for other animals. So like birds and squirrels and things that eat insects. They are a food supply for them, and so they can help some of those populations. But that is a good question. I'm not sure if they destroy food sources.
I guess I would imagine that if they were impactful to the food supply, that there would be a more active campaign to eliminate them or limit them. Yeah.
I think that they're underground sort of eating and consuming and sort of getting ready for the big mating time is what I imagine is what their purpose is. Now, in terms of collecting them, like for food supplies and things, there are legitimate concerns whenever you catch and raise bugs in the wild, based on what they're exposed to, because since it's not a controlled environment, you're not sure if they're coming from a ground source that has been contaminated with whatever chemical, right? And so there can be concerns about quality control, but it's also sort of in my mind it's sort of a bit of an ironic or funny thing, because we talk about like free range animals or like hunting wild animals as something that is more pure than ones that have come from controlled settings in some cases. But depending on the application, maybe instead of using wild cicadas for food, we could use them for biofuels or something like that. There's other types of sort of things that we can use for them, or chitin extraction for packaging. There's sort of different options and opportunities, and I think that there are just lots of areas to explore that are really underexplored and haven't been tapped into yet. So lots of opportunities, I think.
Okay, so we have one more question, Benjamin. We'll get to him, but before that happens, I know we're at time, and if people have to leave, I want to get just a few things out. Thank you, Sarah. This was awesome. I really learned a lot. It was really cool stuff. For everybody who is on the call, a tree will be planted on your behalf. So congratulations, and thank you all for being willing and engaging participants. I will also, in the chat for this team's event later today, or as soon as this call is over, post links to both the challenge and our other Earth Week events. So for every event that you participate in, including the challenge, a tree will be planted. So please keep coming back this whole week. We have some really good content for you. With that, I'll pass it to Benjamin. You have a question?
Yeah, hey Sarah, this may be a bit of a challenge, but my least favorite insect would be mosquitoes, and I was wondering if you had heard of any way that we can maybe leverage mosquitoes to be useful.
That's a great question, and I was actually doing I was trying to sort of do a little hunting around on mosquitoes too, because I know here where I live, there are a lot of signs that say like, don't spray mosquitoes, blah, blah, blah. But they are, they're a concern in terms of vectors for disease transmission and stuff. I have come across some options in terms of like, encouraging other types of animals as predators for mosquitoes. There's other things that you can do in terms of when you do have stagnant water, like a pond, if you can install like an aeration system, essentially a fountain, to help to make sure that the water doesn't stay stagnant enough for mosquitoes to then lay eggs and breed. There's sort of different types of natural or sustainable non-spray solutions that you can do for those. I have heard about another, I think it's somewhere in Europe, where they've basically taken mosquito, and it actually really concerns me, because they basically have a lab full of mosquitoes where they have injected them with something that basically makes it to where they're sterile. So they can't. The thought is that when you release these out into the natural ecosystem, is that it's basically going to be like a a culling of insects in the world because they've inserted these other mosquitoes with something that we're basically when they mate, their offspring will be sterile. I think that's what it is. And so that's that is a way to be able to minimize populations. It concerns me from an ecosystem standpoint of what does that do to the environment. Yes, dragonflies, great point, marigolds, things like that. Yeah, there's lots of sort of other natural ways to get rid of them. But yeah, the sort of when we mess too much with nature in terms of an artificial setting, like creating sterile mosquitoes and things like that, I worry definitely about the sort of the ripple effects of the predators that consume them. And so I don't know the right answer for that. I don't know. It's a great question, Benjamin.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I appreciate you. You've been very insightful. Thank you.
Thanks for the question.
I will say along that vein, I heard to combat malaria, they are genetically enhancing mosquitoes so that the mosquito's offspring will not be able to carry it. And then, they'll just let a few of those out and they will eventually mate. And eventually you'll just have a whole population of mosquitoes that can no longer pass on malaria.
Right. And so cool. I mean, it's exciting in the sense that cool that we can do that scientifically. I do worry about what that means in terms of that sort of situation with malaria. That's I think better in terms of not messing with their sort of natural
right. Still
abilities.
Reproducing. They're just not.
Right. Because they do feed, a lot of other species feed off of mosquitoes. And so if you were to, they're annoying for us, but there's there's a lot of other implications.
All right. Well, we're at time. This was awesome. Thank you so much, Sarah. Everybody, have a great week. And I look forward to seeing you all
everybody. Thank you.
Next event.
Thank you all so much.